Good afternoon and greetings from UB. Welcome to our Alumni Webinar Wednesday series. On behalf of the Office of Alumni Engagement and the UB School of Management, we are delighted you are able to join us for today's presentation. My name is Christy Fields and I oversee the Alumni Careers and Lifelong Learning program here at UB. It's a very exciting time here on campus as the class of 2022 has been going through orientation this past month, and those that will be living on campus will be moving in on August 23rd. It's hard to believe classes resume later this month. With that said, today I am honored to welcome and introduce you to Dr. Tim Maynes and Marianne Rogers. Dr. Tim Maynes is an assistant professor of organization and human resources in the University at Buffalo School of Management. His research focuses on innovation and creativity, employee proactivity, organizational change, and the process of selecting leaders. His research has been published in the Journal of Applied Psychology, the Journal of Organizational Behavior, and the Oxford Handbook of Organizational Citizenship Behavior. Prior to earning his PhD at Indiana University's Kelley School of Business, he worked as a financial statement auditor at a CPA firm for several years. Originally from California, Professor Maynes and his family have come to love Western New York and enjoy skiing, hiking, and playing sports together. Professor Marianne Rogers, BA 96 and EMBA 98, is a clinical assistant professor for the School of Management's Organization and Human Resource and Accounting and Law Department. She oversees the school's undergraduate communication literacy program and principally teaches communication and organizational behavior courses on the undergraduate MBA and executive MBA levels. Professor Rogers also served as visiting professor in the Singapore Institute of Management. Throughout her career, she held a variety of administrative positions in the University at Buffalo, which include development and external relations, personnel, and resource management responsibilities. In today's webinar, you will learn how most first-time managers are surprised to learn that the myths and expectations of being a boss often don't match with reality. Indeed, for many, the thrill of gaining a coveted promotion quickly gives way to feelings of uncertainty and even disorientation. You will also learn how organizations specifically help new leaders make the transition from employee to new manager and give them the tools to successfully manage their new set of responsibilities. We are going to leave some time at the end of today's webinar for Q&A. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them through the GoToWebinar control panel question box that you see on your screen. And then in addition, Dr. Maynes and Professor Marianne Rogers have created a workbook that you can use when following along to today's presentation. You are able to download it directly from the GoToWebinar control panel handout section, and I have also emailed all attendees earlier this morning. So with that said, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Dr. Tim Maynes and Professor Marianne Rogers.
Thank you so much, Christy. Thanks for all of your help, and good afternoon, everyone. We're so happy that you've chosen to join us for today's webinar. I'm Marianne Rogers, and I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Dr. Timothy Maynes, and today we'll be sharing with you the results of a study that Professor Maynes and I completed in late spring of the past year. We indeed just finished the study only 3 months ago, so the data is still very fresh. And through our work, we found a lot of really interesting and enlightening insights, and we're so excited to present them to you today. So let's begin. And before we go directly to today's agenda, however, I would like to ask Professor Maynes to just take a moment to describe a little bit of the background as to how we came up with the idea for this particular study.
Yeah, so as we started, this study, and we were sort of thinking about leadership and the first time that someone assumes a leadership role. And what really was kind of intriguing to us and what motivated us to conduct the study was that we didn't really have a great understanding about what it is that new leaders struggle with. What are their challenges? What keeps them up at night? What are the things that they need help with in order to be more effective in their work? And, maybe there are some unanticipated challenges that come along. And our work is based loosely on the work of a Harvard Business School professor by the name of Linda Hill. She conducted a study back in the late 1990s where she examined similar themes, and that was kind of our starting point of the study. If you could now turn with me, if you've got the workbook there, if you've downloaded it, to page 1 of the workbook. There's an exercise described there. It's a reflection exercise. And if you could just kind of follow along there in the workbook and reflect on the first time that you were promoted. What went well? What surprised you? What would you have done differently in that experience? If you could just take about 60 seconds and think about those questions and formulate a response. And then if you could, we would really appreciate it if you could post your thoughts related to any of those 3 questions in the chat area of the webinar. And in a few minutes, Christy Fields, who's facilitating this webinar, will summarize what she's seeing that's being posted there. So take about 60 seconds.
Okay, so that's just about 60 seconds. Hopefully that was enough time for you to reflect and draw up some memories, maybe hopefully more good than bad, of the experiences that you've had. Let's just take a walk through our agenda for our session. We'll begin by explaining the study, how we tackled it, the way that it was designed, and then moving into categories of our findings, which we broke into the good, the bad, and the unexpected. And then we'll close with some final thoughts and would be happy to entertain any questions that you choose to throw our way.
So I just want to quickly describe how we conducted the study that we are basing this presentation on. So there were a number of different elements here to it, and the first step was to conduct a focus group. And what we did was we gathered together a group of 11 UB alumni, and we spent an hour with them. And we had a list of questions related to, what it was like in the first leadership experience that they had, that first leadership role or job that they had. And then we gathered some really interesting things from that focus group. And from there, we went into some interviews, and we conducted about 10 more interviews and spent about an hour with each of the people that we interviewed, and gathered some additional themes, and felt like some of the themes that we had seen in the focus group were reinforced and expressed again. And then the next question that we had was, so we're conducting these interviews, and we had the focus group, and it was a small number of people, 20 people total, about 21. And the question we had was, do the experiences of these 21 people generalize to a broader population? Are these challenges that we've learned about challenges that everyone experiences generally, or are they just limited to this set of people that we've interviewed? So from the interviews and the focus group, we developed a survey based on the themes that we saw emerge, and then submitted that survey to a large nationally representative population, and all of the survey items were self-reported, and so that's something to remember as we go through our findings today. The survey had about 40 questions, had some demographic information. We had a total of 253 people respond to the survey, and we had a wide variety of people from lots of different industries, occupations, functional areas. The average age of respondents was about 35. They had about 3 years of leadership experience, about 10 years of total work experience, and the teams that they had been leading, the average size was about 8 people, about 8 direct reports. The gender of the respondents was roughly equivalent between men and women, so that was nice to see a balance along those lines.
Okay, so let me share a little bit more about our focus groups and interviews, and just from a sort of a macro level, how we were looking at this from 60,000 feet up. In short, we found that some very certain themes emerged. We learned really valuable lessons from the stories that we heard, and we found that regardless of the industry or the occupation, the stories that emerged were generally the same. So we knew that we were onto something.
Now, so we found some interesting things, as Professor Rogers mentioned, and I promise that we're going to get to those in just a minute. Going to keep you in suspense while we turn the time to Christy Fields, and she's going to summarize some of the comments that you've all been making to the chat section related to the same kinds of questions we asked with people in our focus groups and interviews. What were the challenges? What went well with the first time that you were in a leadership role? So, Christy, if you could take a few moments and summarize what you're seeing.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Maynes. A couple of responses that have come through. Somebody mentioned, some people might undermine you and test you quicker than anticipated, and everyone is a little different. Some may need more direct supervision, others do not. Another one that came through, it surprised and confused someone to have an option, and then someone was more vulnerable and asked better questions. Organizational skills improved, supervision improved. Something else that happened, people seem to do a lot better with written communication, someone found out. Also, another thing that went well, easily accepted as a new team leader. And also somebody was successfully able to build a team because of that.
Great. Thank you, Christy. And thank you all for sharing insights into your own experience as a leader, and especially that first role that you had as a leader.
Okay. All right. Let's get to the good stuff. Here are some of our findings, and we'll start with what people generally found to be good. All right. I will just direct your attention to page 2 of your workbook. If you're flipping to that page, you'll see that we have some items, results of our key survey items. We've listed them there, and we left the percentages that coincide with them blank, just in a way to get you to maybe follow along with us. If you want to jot down the percentages that we're reporting, you might find that helpful. We just find that it's a really nice way for people to think along with us and to reinforce some of the content that we're delivering today. So let's jump in. All right. So we saw enough generalizable features that we gave categories certain handles or labels. And the first one that we identified was what we called the general. And here, what this means, participants reported that as a leader, they were very comfortable in giving direction and making assignments. So this is a real important competency. If you're a manager, you know this. If you're supervising managers, you know how important this is. Now, this was self-reported information. So those involved in our pool self-reported, and 85% of them said that they were good at this particular competency. Interesting, if you think back, 85% of your bosses, did they perform in this particular manner? Probably not. So we got a little bit of a chuckle seeing how high this percentage was, that mostly everybody in the pool thought that they were really very good at this.
The next category that we see is based on the survey item. My subordinates would say that I'm very good at explaining and teaching how to complete the tasks I assign. So we've labeled this group of individuals as, the professor. People who do this well, they're the professor. They explain and they teach how to do the work that's assigned to the direct reports. And this is an amazing and talented group of people, at least in their own minds. And 89% said that they're very good at this competency. They are very capable at explaining and teaching.
Okay. Next, we'll move on to the Persuader. I am able to get the members of my team or group to buy into changes that I want to make. Here, 89% self-reported as being good at this as well. And as we walk through the slide deck, we really want you to keep reflecting on your own strengths in these areas and how well you relate to the competencies that are being reported here.
Our next category is what we've labeled the minister. I'm very good at listening to my teams or groups' ideas and suggestions. So once again, we had 253 people respond to the survey, and they're very well-developed leaders. 90% reported that this was a strength of theirs. They were very good at listening to the teams or groups' suggestions and ideas.
Okay, and then the last one in this category is what we've labeled the Gracious Monarch. I know when to give people freedom to work on their own versus providing specific instructions, not micromanaging, not hovering over anyone, not breathing down a direct report's neck to get work done, that kind of thing. 92% said that this is a competency that they owned. So no micromanagers were in this pool of those that we surveyed, evidently. All right. So by way of an overview, I'm just going to toss it back to Tim. If you want to recap this particular slide, that'd be great.
Yeah. So just to recap really quickly, we've been talking about from the survey findings what was good, what did respondents feel like they were good at, what were their capabilities and competencies, and so we found that for the most part, new leaders felt very comfortable giving direction and making assignments, that they felt like they were good at explaining and teaching how to do the work. They felt like they were able to get people to buy into changes that they wanted to make in their teams or their work groups or their organizations. They felt like they were good at listening, and that they were good at knowing when to give specific instructions and to sort of manage closely versus providing people with proper amount of freedom. So, overall, a high level of competency, or at least that most of the people in our survey, the respondents, indicated these were strengths that they possessed. So now we'd like to transition and talk about what we've labeled the bad. And what was surprising to us was that these were self-reported survey items, remember, and so it wasn't surprising, I guess, that our respondents indicated that they had some strengths. Maybe it was a bit more surprising, though, to find that they also admitted some weaknesses, some areas where they could use some development and some improvement. And so to me, this is some strong evidence. If it's self-reported and they're saying, yeah, these were things that we struggled with or that were challenges for us, to me, this is an indication of we're really on to something here, and an area where new leaders are likely to need some help. So if you could all turn with me to page 3 of your workbook, we'll begin talking about these challenges there.
Okay, so let's begin this section. Our first label is what we've dubbed the firefighter. I spend a substantial part of my day, quote unquote, fighting fires, and so I'm not able to get to the things that I know will help my team and group achieve a longer term success. So what is going on here? This has to do with spending time in an unplanned fashion, not able to really get to the important stuff that really matters. And this goes on day to day. Instead of planning and delivering success in the long term, the way that the new manager should, they're struggling a little bit in this area. So we definitely know that this is a problem. This is something that goes on a lot, to the degree of 32%. So roughly a third of our population is having a problem with this and just getting kind of caught up in the weeds of day-to-day items that will not help them deliver their long-term objectives.
And we all know how important this is. As leaders, as managers, we've experienced it. We know how important it is to spend time planning on and developing strategies and developing ways to improve and thinking about the longer-term success of the group or the team. Mm-hmm. Without spending time there, it's likely not to end well for the manager. The next category of managers is we have labeled the avoider. So the survey item here read, rather than having difficult conversations with low performers, I generally develop alternative ways to get the work done without relying on them. And we found that almost 40% of respondents struggled with this. They would avoid having those difficult conversations. And as we conducted the interviews and the focus group, there was a story that emerged and that we found to be really interesting that kind of captures the meaning of this survey item. there was a woman, and she was promoted into a new role, a new leadership role. And in that role, she was supervising other leaders. And one of her leaders, one of the people that she was supervising, was unable to perform her job. She just couldn't seem to do it. She was heavily involved in micromanaging her direct reports rather than spending time on strategy and the direction and vision of her division of the organization. And so this new leader tried to help and encouraged her to work on the tasks that needed to be done, but it was to no avail. About a year and a half was spent, and she just never could have the difficult conversation where she told her direct report, I really need you to be working on these other tasks. I can't have you micromanaging your staff. And so instead of having that difficult conversation, she hired an executive coach for each member of the team. So there were a total of 6 people, including herself, and she hired an executive coach. And then for the woman who was having the struggle, she went to that person's executive coach and said, can you tell this woman that I need her to be working on this other set of tasks? And so instead of having the difficult conversation, a year and a half goes by, time is spent, money and so on, and resources, and we're not able to drive objectives. And then to get around it, hired an executive coach to take care of it for her. So that's kind of what we're meaning when we talk about this, the avoider, someone who just doesn't feel comfortable or capable of having tough conversations, even though they may be needed.
Mm-hmm. Quite common. All right. Our third one is a controller. So even when I can delegate work to others, I often do the work myself because it is more efficient. Now, really think about this one. Sometimes this is just like an avoidance behavior, a low confidence behavior. Sometimes it's a trust issue. But when we really get to the essence of it, this is really a dangerous one, because if you've ever worked under a manager like this, you probably don't have very good memories. This kind of behavior most definitely leads to burnout and fatigue for everyone involved, quite frankly, but especially on the part of the direct reports who aren't given the chance to properly develop. So there's frustration, sometimes there's confusion, they're just not able to apply their talents and gifts and make contributions to the degree that they would like to, because the manager has this sort of issue. So there's no surprise that reports working under this type of manager will sooner rather than later probably pick up and take their talents elsewhere.
Yeah, because they're not developing. They're not having opportunities to develop. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so then moving on, so 44% surprisingly self-reported as being a controller. And again, we can't stress enough how grateful we were for everyone's candidness. These are not easy things to admit. And the idea that we did get this kind of data out, was something that we're grateful for and was very helpful to us as we began working through the rest of the study. The next label is what we've deemed the counselor. I feel like it is important to be a friend and confidant to every member of my team or group on an individual basis. There's another great story that came out of our study when we were working through our focus group. And here, almost half of our population reported working this way. And a wonderful attorney that was in our focus group, she works for the IRS, she really identified with this particular label. She wants to be a counselor. She wants to spend time during her workday counseling her people because she's certain that it leads to a stronger, more trusting team. So she doesn't see this as a detriment. She sees this as a strength. And so we'll ask you to think through this with us too. This is something we talk about a lot, and we think, is this something that indeed is good for a team, or does it take time away from more critical matters? But what we're talking about here is her door is always open. Her people have challenges with aging parents and divorces and broken relationships and troubled children and family members off the rails. These are all things that impact the quality of anyone's work, of course. And, in this case, our participant thought that it was just really valuable to be able to lend an ear, perhaps a solution, and spend quality time on these kinds of things. And, so she wouldn't have it any other way. And, if you came to her, she would want to help you.
And obviously there's emotional burden and a toll that comes from the work that she's doing there. And maybe it's good work, but it's also work that maybe takes her away, as Professor Rogers mentioned, from driving important objectives and outcomes for the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So the next category that we have is a category that we've entitled the second shifter. So the survey item here reads, I frequently stay late, come to work early, or work on weekends to get my work done. And maybe my guess is that many of us can identify with this one in particular. When we were first promoted into a leadership role, we had just been an individual contributor, and we were accountable for doing work that was assigned to us. And it may have been the case even that as we were promoted, that all of those individual contributor tasks may not have been taken from us. So we still had individual work to get done, in addition to having now responsibilities to lead others, to motivate people, to assign tasks, to follow up, to review work. And so all of this extra supervisory and leadership work was maybe added to our plate. In one of the interviews or the focus group, we had a woman who was a participant who had some insight into this second shifter phenomenon. In fact, she's the one who gave us the label for it. She was a woman working in an accounting firm, and smart and capable and bright, and she advanced quickly. And as she looked forward in her first couple of years, she was in a staff role, and as she looked at the work of her manager, she thought, that's something I can do. I can do that work. And then shortly thereafter, she was promoted and became a supervisor herself. And then she quickly realized that she could not get all of her work done during the day. She had some individual tasks that she still needed to do, in addition to those leadership responsibilities. And she realized quickly that she was not going to be able to get everything done. And so she started to stay late, to work early, to come to work early, or to work on weekends. And it was, it takes a toll on family and your personal life and so on. And she began to refer to this time, this extra time that she spent at work, as the second shift. So anybody in a leadership role, you really, all of the prestige of that promotion is maybe washed away by the fact that you're spending a lot more time at work than you were before, and it can result in burnout and fatigue and dissatisfaction and underperformance of your work unit. And interestingly, we found that 54%, 1 in 2, half of the respondents in our survey population struggled with this challenge.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's take a look. If you've been following along with us, your worksheet should look like it does on the screen with the numbers there. And so what do we take from this when we really take a step back and think about what's going on here? It's likely that new leaders struggle with at least 3 of the challenges that you see on your page. And it's just as likely that maybe they are struggling with 4 or maybe even all 5. So they're just very common issues for new managers, and this is what we were getting our arms around.
Yeah, so they're firefighters, or they're second shifters, or they're counselors, and so they're struggling with a number of these challenges in addition to trying to get their own work done. So our final set of observations from the survey findings have to do with what we would think of as unanticipated challenges, challenges that these new leaders didn't see coming. So this reminds me a little bit of one of the comments from you all that Christy Fields shared with, you get promoted into a new job and you realize really quickly that there's kind of a political element to the job, and so maybe that was something that people don't see coming. The first item that we have under this section of challenges that were unanticipated is, I have led a team or group that struggled with significant internal conflict. How many of you have had that experience? You've got a team, you've got members that just can't get along, and there's fighting and conflict, and dissension between the members of the team. In our survey, 68% of the new managers had led a team that had this. So they'd experienced it as a leader. And 34% of those who had experienced it said, yeah, we managed that well. We managed it effectively. And all of the others, so, 2 out of 3 said, no, we could have done better. We could have done a lot better. And we kind of failed at managing the situation.
All right. Our second item, I have led a team or a group in which there was a lot of back-channel communication and politicking behind the scenes. Here again, 68% with 36% reporting that they failed to cope with this issue successfully. And this one in particular can really rattle a new manager. Direct reports will be political, more often than not, for resources, for attention, for other things. And failing to manage that well can really lead to a culture or a climate that quickly becomes toxic.
Yeah. The next item, item number 3, this survey item captured what we might term the bad apple phenomenon. I've led a team or a group in which 1 or 2 members had a bad attitude that threatened to undermine the morale of the team. And I'm curious if you've experienced that kind of a thing. In our sample, 3 out of 4, 74% of our survey respondents had experienced that. And only 1 in 3 felt like they did a good job at managing that situation. So once again, 2/3 thought that they could have done a better job.
Yeah, tough stuff. All right, the next one. I have worked for a boss who did not have the ability to give me the resources I needed to be effective as a leader. 2/3, again, reporting, and out of those 2/3, 32% failed to deal with it properly. So what do you have here? Here you have the new manager in a pretty difficult sandwich, if you will. In getting promoted, some new managers are surprised that they just can't control directly. And so here, persuasion and managing up become key skills to acquire. They're now enmeshed in a more diverse, complicated dynamic, and oftentimes without formal power. So that can really put new managers in a quandary.
So we've talked about a lot of different things here. We've talked about competencies and skills that new managers feel like they're pretty good at. We identified several areas where there's a need for improvement or development. And then we also uncovered some unexpected challenges, issues and challenges that new leaders may not see coming, and that maybe organizations could do a better job of preparing new leaders and managers to anticipate and to manage once they have that situation.
Okay, so at this moment, we would like to direct your attention to page 4 of the session workbook. We've just spent some time sharing the results of our spring study in which the thorniest issues for new managers were considered. So as part of our work, we also surveyed participants about the types of resources and help that they find exist in their organization. So the information that you see on page 4 was actually embedded in our overall study too. And the items that you see appearing here are what is presented as existing solutions in the workplace.
Yeah. So if you are looking there at page 4 of the workbook, there are a number of common leadership development activities or leadership development opportunities available in organizations. And we wanted to assess the degree to which these provided value for our survey participants. Did they feel like, that these various ways of developing leadership competency and capability were actually beneficial? And we also wanted to get a sense of, how commonly were these forms available to our participants. And so what you can see there is a list of 9 different leadership development opportunities available that are commonly available in many organizations. So subscriptions to leadership content, leadership and management books, leadership seminars and presentations, in-house training on personnel policies and procedures, support groups composed of other leaders at similar levels that, where you can share experiences and talk about challenges and how to deal with those challenges, in-house management training programs, or like fast-track management training programs, leadership training. We'll talk more about that one in just a minute. Rotational programs where you experience multiple jobs. You kind of rotate through different jobs in a number of months or over the course of a couple of years. Or you have mentors who are assigned. And probably, most of us have experienced a number of these different leadership development activities. And what we find that's really interesting is if you look over on the right-hand side of the slide, the percentages you see there are percentages of our respondents who found no or very limited value in these leadership development activities. So 58% said that, subscriptions to leadership contents like a newsletter or something like that was of little value. 58%, over half. Leadership and management books, about half said not a lot of value. Even the best, having a mentor assigned by the organization, there's still significant room for improvement. 1 in 4, so that's 23% that I found no value. That means that 1 in 4 found no value in that resource for their development. And so you can see there's vast room for improvement here in the way that organizations help new leaders transition into this role. This is a challenging thing to move from an individual contributor role to a role in which you're leading other people.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, so despite best intentions, all the time and effort and money, there's still a level of disappointment that goes on with all of this.
Yeah. So there are, of course, a number of different ways that organizations can develop their leaders, and you all are embedded in a number of different companies and organizations, and so we'll leave to you the best ways to address these challenges that we've identified in the organizations that you belong to. I want to draw your attention to one last bit of information. At the bottom of page 4 in your workbook, there's a list of leadership training that was most commonly provided in the organizations in which the respondents to our survey, the companies and organizations that they work for. So you can see there that performance evaluation, just over half had received that kind of training, conflict management about 50%, team building about 50%, coaching mentoring about 50%. So you can kind of read down through those and see that it's possible that some of the challenges, the unexpected challenges, or just the challenges in general that were faced by the managers in our survey, the new leaders, could have been addressed with some training. It's possible that this training could have helped with that. So that concludes what we wanted to share in terms of the research that we conducted and the findings that we found, what we think is really interesting and valuable information.
Okay. All right. So, Christy, if we can invite you back on the line, if there's any questions, we'd be happy to address them.
Excellent. Thank you so much for all of this valuable information that we can take back to our organizations and companies. We're very grateful for that. One thing, a question that did come through, do you have any suggestions on maybe books or resources that are out there for new leaders or for employees to develop new leaders? Any suggestions on books or resources that you might find useful?
We do have several, and we have some leadership experts on our faculty, and we'd be happy to assemble a list of what we think are the best ones. Would that be possible? Could we have a chance to communicate with our webinar participants again, right? Is that something that we could email out?
Absolutely, and I'm happy to do that. So if you have a list, we can definitely circulate that to all of our attendees. That would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Just another question, too, that has come up. With the focus groups that you did work with, the study that you found, did the study or did the focus group find that new leaders found that mentors were valuable, and did the mentors find that their mentee relationship was valuable in the organization?
There were some pros and cons that went along with that, and I think as we're looking at the list on page 4, obviously the more one-on-one time that someone gets, the more individual attention that someone gets, the stronger the solution. And so Professor Maynes and I are in agreement that mentor programs, can really generate wonderful results. When it becomes a little bit more troublesome when a mentor is formally assigned to a mentee in the organization, perhaps those two individuals don't have a lot in common. It's just not a good match for one reason or another. That seems to be, in our opinion, when it tends to derail a little bit. We find that the relationship works really well when the mentee seeks out the mentor because maybe the mentor has been through similar experiences, it knows the industry. There's just more of an organic relationship where the two just genuinely like one another more. You know what I mean? Does that sound about right from what we heard?
Yeah, absolutely. So the respondents in our survey and in our focus groups and interviews indicated that when they selected their own mentor, they were significantly happier with the relationship and the advice and feedback and direction they were receiving. So one bit of advice we would give to new leaders is, be a bit proactive and find a good mentor. Mm-hmm. And I would suggest you need at least two. You need one inside the organization and one outside of the organization. Sometimes you have challenges or issues that you're dealing with that you really don't want to talk about with someone inside the company. You need somebody with a different perspective, or that the word won't get out and around the organization that you're struggling with a particular thing. So it's helpful to have somebody outside the organization too. So you need probably at least two strong mentors. And so being a bit proactive. I think there are some differences. Some of the leaders in our sample, didn't do a great job of seeking out mentors. And so I'm not sure exactly what the difference is. Our data doesn't speak to that. But why do some seek out mentors and why do some not? I'm not sure. But overall, the advice would be, you've got to have at least two self-identified and self-sought-out mentors.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. The next question that came in, any advice for effective meeting facilitation?
For a what type? Could you just repeat that, Christy?
Sure. Any advice for effective meeting facilitation?
Effective meeting facilitation. Okay. For the manager to learn how to do that?
Yes, I think that's where they're going. Yes.
That is its own kind of training. And that goes along with, owning the position, really refining one's presence and having confidence and so forth. But there's also literature on that too. I see Professor Maynes looking through through the library on his shelf. There are tools that we can pass along. There is a lot of do's and don'ts about how to run a meeting and so forth. That just becomes almost like a muscle memory after a while. I remember being terrified the first time I had to run a meeting, and the fear that comes along with maybe looking incompetent or maybe a little foolish, and really being able to take the reins of a group and just to handle maybe even difficult people who talk too much or tend to dominate, and really learning the ins and outs of that. And that is something that really is a skill that can be learned over a short period of time if you just know what to look for, using some language as to how to shut down some of the destructive behaviors and so forth. We'd be happy to help assemble something on that topic as well.
Yeah, so we'll send in that list of books that we provide to Christy to be sent out. We'll provide some reading materials on effective meeting facilitation as well. That's a great suggestion, Mary.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Great, thank you. The next question, do you have any recommendations on dealing with employees who feel undervalued, underpaid, and problems start branching to employee attendance while the company is struggling to keep attendance and retain those employees?
So this is a challenge. I guess I'll make some assumptions here, but I'm guessing that the employees feel undervalued, and that maybe they actually are undervalued, meaning that the organization doesn't have resources to reward them at the level that they feel like they deserve, and that the external marketplace is willing to reward them, to make up that difference. So, in that case, what the research tells us, and not necessarily the research that we've done here, but other research tells us, is that non-monetary rewards can go a long way in helping employees to feel more satisfied with their work. Managers who have learned the art of tactfully complimenting and sort of building up the confidence of the people that work for them, that can go a long way in helping people to feel like they're valued and needed, and the work they do is worthwhile. It helps them to feel like they're contributing and making a difference. And that's in the case where you don't have a formal way to reward. There's not extra money lying around to give people bonuses or raises.
Yeah, and just paying attention to people, and especially when they're going the extra mile and so forth, and making sure that that's recognized, and just even checking in on people sometimes and asking them how their day is, can really generate a lot of mileage too.
Yeah.
Fantastic. The next question that has come through from an attendee, they were curious if there were some leaders included in the study that were representing the remote work world.
Probably.
We're fairly confident that there were. We didn't ask questions specifically about that in the survey. I do recall that in an interview that I conducted, specific challenges were mentioned related to remote work. There's not face-to-face time, so it's hard to build relationships of trust. It's hard to build relationships not just between the leader and the direct reports, the members of the team, but also between the members of the team. And so there are some specific challenges to that context. Not something that we investigated particularly in this study, but it was mentioned as a challenge faced by, not just new leaders, but any leader when they're managing people who work remotely.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. The next question from an attendee, is it safe to assume reciprocal numbers for slide 5? So, for example, in-house training on personnel policies and procedures, which was 69%, would have gleaned value out of it.
Can you repeat that question, Christy? I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch the meaning.
Absolutely. Is it safe to assume reciprocal numbers for slide 5? Example, in-house training on personnel policies and procedures, 69% would have gleaned value out of it?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a negative.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
So all of the survey items on page 4 of the workbook, where we said that where we talked about the degree to which the respondents in our survey found value or didn't find value with various leadership development activities in organizations, you could take the inverse of that. 1 minus 58%, for example, for subscriptions to leadership content. In other words, 42% did find some value. Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And I think the point we're making, because again, we do believe in mentor programs, very much so. But if 1 out of 4 people are unhappy, if you perhaps put that in the context of like a marketing initiative or something, where you're hitting 75% of your audience instead of 100%, would you be happy with that? It's really within the context of the organization, and the idea of whether the time and money is worth being spent. If 77% are happy with their mentor initiative, that's probably a good number, but still worth taking a look at. Could it be improved? And I think Professor Maynes was reinforcing this. There is room for improvement in all of these ideas. How we do that individually, company to company, we can't really say, but oftentimes these particular types of solutions are thrown as a silver bullet. Like, oh, we're just going to bring in trainers and we're going to have a training day. And it's, there's a little naivete in thinking that that's really going to solve the problems. These are all good things. But they're not, they're not solutions that can just magically solve some of the problems. It just takes a lot of trust and work. And Professor Maynes and I were in a session today. We were talking with leaders for a different study, but what really struck us was the amount of time that they put into really overcoming their own obstacles, whether they be mental, emotional, or whatever, really working on becoming vulnerable with their people, establishing trust with their people. Because I think, for anyone who's on the line that has been a first-time manager, the thing that everyone fears the most is not having the answer when asked a question, or just not really knowing what to do the first time through. And so how do you flip that into something that becomes more team-based, where people really trust you and you trust them, and you start to work on working through solutions through that kind of approach. So there's so many things that go into managing and leading. We just decided to put the lens on the things that you see on page 4 into the negative, because we thought that it just generated a different kind of information that we thought was worth considering.
Excellent, thank you. Then the next question from somebody, how do you know if you should aspire to become a manager, given the fact that they were once one and now have the opportunity to do so again?
So the question is about whether someone's kind of are they ready? Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, the question itself suggests to me that there's kind of a readiness. And the reason I say that is because what my experience has been is that when I'm teaching a class of undergraduate students, or even MBA students, they all feel like they're ready for leadership. And it's only after experiencing it that first time that they may realize that they weren't as ready as they thought they were, and that there are a number of challenges. And it's probably going to be the most challenging transition of their career, from that individual contributor role to that first-time leadership role. So just recognizing that that's a challenge suggests to me that that person may be ready for it, assuming that they take some steps to make sure that they're going to be successful. So being self-aware, understanding what the strengths and weaknesses are that you have, and making sure that you've got people around you who can make up for your weaknesses. And not over-relying on your strengths, that can be a challenge as well. Finding 2 good mentors, like we've already mentioned, can help help the person be successful as they make that transition back to a leadership role.
Mm-hmm. And the way that we train all of our students, undergrad or graduate, is to rely less on what's known as legitimate power. So just because one has a space on the org chart doesn't mean that if they say something, the request is going to be followed. And that's a big surprise for a lot of leaders too, or first-time managers too. I am the boss. If I ask for something, darn it, it should be finished. And it's a surprise to many that it just doesn't work that way. Some people have bad attitudes. Sometimes there's communication issues, legitimately. The request, didn't get transferred. There's all sorts of things. And so a big part of our instruction is to develop other bases of power, an expert base of power. Be really good at your job. A referent base of power. Be well-liked and respected, where people will come to you for advice and direction and things like that. That's a much different way of leading, as opposed to just the harder way of just kind of, pounding on subordinates and demanding things be done because you're the manager.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to just build on what Professor Rogers is saying here, because I think this is really important. The work that Linda Hill did, that I mentioned at the beginning, this Harvard professor, one of the things that she found in her research is that almost all leaders, not all, but almost all new leaders go through a transition phase where when they're first promoted, they kind of use this hard power approach, I'm the boss, so you're going to do what I say approach. And what they find is that that's a fairly ineffective method of leading, and much more effective is to use what Professor Rogers was terming the soft power, the expert, and that you've built up trust and relationships and connections with the people that you're leading. And so there's this transition that Linda Hill finds that effective managers make, and that transition is between being the directive leader to a leader who listens and allows members of the team to participate in decision making, and is able to recognize the strengths of the members of the team and leverage those strengths. And so that takes some observation and listening and observing and thinking about the people that you're working with. That takes a level of humility that I think is essential to lead effectively. But very good points.
Mm-hmm. Great question.
Great, thank you. And then also just a question that came through. Can you just maybe re-explain the slide that is currently up right now, and just kind of go through that one more time?
Yeah. So this slide is related to one of the previous, one of the most recent questions.
I'm sorry.
It's the inverse of this slide.
Mm-hmm.
It's up now. So there was a question about, if the items on this slide, if the inverse was true. So if 58% found limited value with subscriptions leadership content, could we say that 42% found value? And the answer is yes. So they're just the inverse of each other. And wanted to provide that just to simplify the conversion for everyone.
Yeah. Sorry for the confusion. I can see how that would be very confusing. Okay.
Very helpful. Just one last question here, too. What are some of your key recommendations that you may have found through your study for managing people with different experience levels?
Well, we had a few in our focus group that experienced that. They were very young, and they had to move in, and they had to manage people that were considerably older, sometimes by a couple of decades. And, some people struggle with that, some don't. I guess it's a matter of equity and treating everyone the same regardless, keeping biases out.
Yeah, Professor Rogers, mentioned this already, but in the focus groups, there were several people who mentioned that this was a challenge, and maybe more of a challenge in their own mind, from their own perception. That a person gets promoted to lead a team, and the team has existing members of the team who are more experienced, more knowledgeable, more expert, longer tenured, and so on. And so there can be a tendency to maybe not have quite as much confidence, or to, especially in terms of a relational between the new leader and that one person who is longer tenured, to feel inadequate in measuring up to that person. And, I don't know if we didn't really get an answer to how to deal with that effectively. So just my quick reaction is that, the organization obviously saw something in you, mm-hmm. And it gave you a vote of confidence by promoting you. And so I would say take that vote of confidence, but also develop a relationship with the person or the people who maybe you feel a little bit threatened by. I think everybody in the end wants to be successful. So if you can find ways to connect what you're doing and what you want to have accomplished with the self-interest, what the other individuals want to accomplish, you can make relationships and get things done.
Great.
Excellent, thank you. And I did have an attendee that just shared a couple of books that they recommend as well, and they recommended a great one by David Novak, Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal, and Powerful by Patty McCord. So those are three that were shared by an attendee, so we're thankful for that as well. Okay. But with that said, I think those are the questions that we have time to get to today, but I just want to say thank you again to Dr. Maynes and Professor Rogers for really just taking some time out of your day, out of your busy schedules as you prep for the new academic year. We're so grateful for the knowledge and expertise that you shared with us, and we're hopeful we can take that back to our organizations and companies over the next couple of days, weeks, and months ahead. So thank you. We have recorded this webinar, so we will send you all the link within the next 24 hours. so you can watch again at your leisure if needed. And then we also want you to save the date for our next webinar. It will be a special webinar Wednesday hosted on Thursday, August 30th, as UB alumna and clinical assistant professor of organization and human resources and faculty director of global programs in the UB School of Management, Dr. Dorothy Sia Asamoah, will join us to share Global Experiences 101, what's on the horizon at UB, and registration and details for that will be coming soon. So again, thank you to Dr. Maynes and Professor Rogers. We're thankful for the time you spent with us today.
Thank you, and thanks everyone who joined us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.